Have you noticed this strange feeling? Right before things change in your life, you stop caring the way you used to? Not in a lazy way, not in a giving up way, but in this quiet, unsettling way where motivation fades, and you start wondering, what's wrong with me? That moment almost made me quit everything, because right before my life shifted in ways I couldn't undo, my brain did something I didn't understand at the time. It went silent. No excitement, no urgency, no fear, just nothing. And I thought that meant I was failing. But what I didn't realize back then is this. Your brain always does this right before change. And if you don't know what's happening, you'll misread the signal and walk away at the exact moment things were about to turn. So if you've been feeling numb, bored, disconnected, or weirdly calm lately, this video might explain something about your life that no one has told you yet. You don't usually feel powerful right before your life changes. That's the part no one warns you about. Most people expect clarity, fire, certainty. But what actually shows up first is something quieter and way more confusing. Right before things started changing for me, real change, not wishful thinking, I didn't feel excited at all. I felt off, flat, like something had drained out of me overnight. I remember waking up one morning and thinking, why don't I care the way I used to? The goals were still there. The vision was still there. But the emotional charge behind them was gone. And that scared me more than fear ever had. Because fear feels familiar. This felt like silence. At the time, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought maybe I'd lost motivation, or discipline, or belief. I almost talked myself into quitting the very things I'd been working toward for months. Looking back now, that moment wasn't a failure. It was the exact moment my brain started letting go of who I used to be. Your brain does something very specific right before change. And if you don't understand it, you'll mistake the signal as a warning, instead of an invitation. Because right before transformation, your mind doesn't speed up. It goes quiet. And if that quiet has found you lately, the numbness, the boredom, the strange sense of, I don't know who I am right now, there's a reason for that. But to see it clearly, we have to talk about the phase everyone skips. The one that feels like nothing is happening at all. Here's what I didn't understand back then. The calm that shows up before change doesn't feel peaceful. It feels empty. There's a big difference. Peace feels safe. This feels unfamiliar. When I first hit this phase, I kept trying to fix it. I'd tell myself I needed more gratitude, more discipline, more positivity. I thought if I could just get the emotion back, everything would start moving again. But the harder I tried to feel something, the quieter my mind became. It felt like my brain had unplugged from the old storyline. No panic, no excitement, just this strange pause. And pauses are uncomfortable when you're used to motion. Here's what was actually happening. Your brain is designed to predict your reality. It runs on patterns, how you usually think, react, and expect things to go. When those patterns stop matching who you're becoming, your brain slows everything down to reassess. Not to punish you, to protect you. So instead of pushing forward, it pulls inward. That's why motivation is often the first thing to go. Motivation belongs to the old version of you, the one who needed force, urgency, and emotion to move. When that identity starts dissolving, the fuel that powered it disappears too. I remember sitting there thinking, if I don't feel driven, how will anything change? But that question came from the old system. The truth was, I didn't need to push anymore. I needed to let the upgrade finish. Most people never make it through this phase because it feels like stagnation. They mistake the pause for a dead end. So they go back to old habits, old thinking, old emotional loops, anything to feel like themselves again. And the moment they do, the calm disappears. But so does the change. Because this calm isn't nothing. It's the space where your brain releases the old identity. And once you understand that, the next thing you'll notice makes a lot more sense. The sudden drop in drive that makes you question everything. This part confused me more than anything else. Because motivation was always my signal. If I felt driven, I assumed I was aligned. If I didn't, I thought I was off track. So when motivation vanished right before things shifted, I panicked. I remember thinking, did I lose belief? Did I stop wanting this?
Am I sabotaging myself?
But motivation isn't neutral. Motivation is emotional pressure. It's the push you need when something feels far away. When your brain starts recognizing that a new reality is becoming normal, it doesn't need that pressure anymore, so it removes it. That's the part no one explains. Your brain is incredibly efficient. If it senses that something is no longer a stretch identity, no longer future you, it stops flooding you with urgency. Urgency belongs to the chase. Alignment belongs to the arrival. I saw this clearly when something I'd been manifesting for years finally showed up. Not dramatically, quietly. I didn't celebrate the way I thought I would. I just thought, yeah, that makes sense. That same emotional flatness shows up before the external shift too. Your brain begins treating the change as inevitable, so it stops motivating you like it's a fantasy. But here's the problem. When people feel that drop, they assume something's wrong. So they try to restart motivation. Vision boards, affirmations, forcing excitement. And that pulls them back into the old identity, the one that believed change was far away. I almost did that. Instead of trusting the quiet, I nearly restarted the struggle. That's the trap. Because right after motivation fades, something else appears. Something even more unsettling if you don't recognize it. It feels like you don't know who you are anymore. And that's where most people turn back. This is the part that made me feel like I was losing myself. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, unsettling way. I'd noticed my reactions changing. Things that used to trigger me didn't land the same. Old fears felt distant. Even my desires felt muted. And my brain didn't like that at all. Because your sense of self isn't some solid thing. It's a pattern your brain repeats every day. How you respond, what you expect, what you brace for. When those patterns stop firing, your brain goes, wait, who are we right now? That's the identity gap. You're no longer the old version, but the new version isn't fully online yet. So there's this in-between state where you feel undefined. I remember thinking, if I'm not stressed, who am I? If I'm not chasing, what am I doing? If I'm not worried, am I being irresponsible? Those thoughts weren't truth. They were my brain reaching for familiarity. And here's where doubt creeps in. Not loud doubt, subtle doubt that sounds reasonable. Maybe this isn't realistic. Maybe I should just be grateful for what I have. Maybe I was better before. That doubt isn't intuition. It's the old identity trying to survive. Your brain prefers a predictable pain over an unfamiliar peace. So when the old patterns start dissolving, it sends doubt as a recall signal. Come back. This is safer. Most people obey it without realizing what they're doing. They reattach to old worries, old routines, old emotional loops, and the identity gap closes, right back where they started. I almost did the same. But something felt different this time. The doubt didn't feel true. It felt automatic. And once I saw that, another realization hit me. One that explained why doubt always spikes right before change. This was the moment everything finally made sense to me. Doubt isn't always a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's a sign you've stopped feeding an old identity. Think about it like this. For years, your brain has been rewarded for certain thoughts. Worrying, planning, bracing, replaying the past. Those patterns kept you safe. They were familiar, predictable. So when you stop engaging them, your brain reacts the same way it would if you quit anything it relied on. It protests. That's why doubt feels urgent. That's why it shows up out of nowhere. That's why it sounds logical instead of emotional. Yep. I remember walking through a grocery store when this hit me. Nothing dramatic, just a random thought. What if I've been lying to myself this whole time? Old me would have spiraled on that thought for hours. This time, it just passed. And that's when I noticed something strange. The doubt wasn't strong. It was repetitive, like a habit firing without energy behind it. That's when it clicked. This wasn't intuition trying to warn me. This was an old mental reflex misfiring. When you stop identifying with the version of you that needed constant vigilance, the brain tries to pull you back with doubt, the same way a muscle twitches when it's losing tension. Most people misread this as a sign to stop, but it's actually proof something has already stopped. the old pattern. And right after this phase, something else shows up that's even more dangerous, because it feels productive. This is where people unknowingly reset all their progress. This is the trap I fell into more times than I want to admit. Right when the doubt faded a little, I'd decide to optimize. I'd change my routine, rewrite my goals, consume more content, try to get aligned again. On the surface, it looked responsible. Underneath, it was fear wearing a productivity mask. Because here's what I didn't see yet. When your brain is releasing an old identity, it hates uncertainty. And if it can't pull you back with doubt, it'll offer you something more convincing. Control. Control feels smart. Control feels mature. Control feels like you're doing something right. But control belongs to the old version of you, the one that believed things only move when you force them. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, reworking plans that didn't actually need fixing. And halfway through, I noticed my chest felt tight again. The calm was gone. That's when it hit me. Every time I tried to fix myself in this phase, I felt worse, not better. More tense, more urgent, more like the old me. That's not coincidence. This phase isn't asking you to do more, it's asking you to not interfere. Your brain is integrating a new baseline. If you keep yanking the wheel, it can't stabilize. Think about it like this. If you keep checking whether a seed has sprouted by digging it up, you don't help it grow, you interrupt it. Silence isn't a problem here. Stillness isn't laziness. Neutrality isn't misalignment. They're signs the old pattern has stopped running. But once you stop sabotaging this phase, something subtle starts happening instead. And it changes how you experience time itself. This was one of the strangest parts for me, and I didn't hear anyone talk about it until much later. Right before things shifted, time felt off. Days blurred together. Weeks passed fast, but moments felt slow. I'd look back and think, how did so much time pass with so little happening? At least that's how it looked on the surface. But internally, a lot was happening. When your brain releases an old identity, it also releases the urgency tied to it. You're no longer racing towards something or running from something, so time stops feeling like pressure. I remember waking up without that familiar anxious push. No rush, no dread, no need to get ahead. And instead of feeling relieved, I felt uneasy. Because urgency had been my compass. Without it, I didn't know how to measure progress. Your brain uses time as a feedback loop. When you're striving, time feels scarce. When you're surviving, time feels heavy. But when you're transitioning, time stretches. That stretch can feel like stagnation if you're not aware of what's happening. I'd catch myself thinking, nothing is moving. When will something happen? Am I wasting time? But those thoughts came from the old relationship with time, the one that equated movement with worth. What I didn't realize was that my brain was recalibrating what normal felt like. And during recalibration, the clock lies. Because externally, things look still. Internally, the foundation is being rebuilt. Most people panic here and rush to fill the space. They add goals, deadlines, pressure, anything to feel time again. But the ones who let time stretch, who don't rush the silence, notice something unexpected next. Reality starts responding in small, almost forgettable ways. And those small moments, they're the first cracks in the old timeline. This is where things start to feel almost anticlimactic. Because the first signs of change aren't big, they're easy to dismiss. A random message, a coincidence you almost ignore. A situation resolving itself without effort. When this started happening to me, I didn't even register it at first. Something I'd been stressing over for months just stopped being a problem. Not solved in a dramatic way. It just lost its charge. The tension evaporated. And my first thought was, that's weird. That's it. No celebration. No, this is it moment. That's how you know it's real. When the change is coming from the outside, it feels exciting. When it's coming from the inside, it feels normal. Your brain is already adjusting to the new baseline, so the evidence doesn't shock you. It feels like confirmation, not surprise. I remember catching myself reacting differently in conversations. I wasn't rehearsing what to say. I wasn't bracing for judgment. Words came out clean, unforced. Later, I realized those were signs, But at the time, I almost brushed them off because they didn't feel impressive. That's another trap. We're taught to look for fireworks, but transformation shows up as ease first. Your brain is testing the new identity in small ways, low-risk situations, everyday moments. It's asking, is this safe now? And every time you respond without old fear, without old urgency, the new pattern locks in deeper. That's why these signs are subtle. They're not meant to excite you. They're meant to stabilize you. If you chase big proof here, you'll miss what's actually happening. Because right after these small shifts stack up, something internal happens that changes how you relate to desire itself. And that's when the real momentum starts. This part is subtle, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Right before things showed up for me, I stopped wanting them the same way. Not because I didn't care, but because the hunger softened. The wanting wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't urgent. It didn't feel like lack. And that confused me. Because we're taught that desire fuels manifestation, that you have to want something badly enough for it to happen. But intense wanting is usually a signal that your brain still believes something is missing. When your mind starts accepting a new reality as normal, the craving relaxes. Desire doesn't disappear, it changes form. I remember realizing one day that I hadn't visualized in a while. Not intentionally, I just didn't feel pulled to. The image felt already familiar.
And instead of excitement, I felt trust.
That's a huge shift. Wanting says, I don't have.
Trust says, I don't need to check.
Most people panic here. They think, if I stop wanting it, won't it stop coming?
But that fear comes from the old rulebook. This phase isn't about attracting,
it's about allowing. Your brain stops broadcasting desire because it no longer sees separation. The signal quiets because the distance has closed internally. That's why this phase feels peaceful but strange. You're no longer chasing the future, you're living from it. And that creates a new challenge. Because when desire softens, the ego gets uncomfortable. It asks, then what do I do now? That question opens the door to the next phase. The one where people accidentally step out of alignment without realizing it.
This is the phase that surprised me the most.
Right when everything felt calm, right when I stopped chasing, something tried to pull me back. Not externally, internally. A voice showed up that sounded reasonable, mature, practical. It said things like, don't get your hopes up. Stay realistic. Maybe you should have a backup plan. That voice wasn't fear, it was ego. And ego doesn't like losing relevance. The ego is built to manage, protect, predict. When your brain stops operating from lack, the ego feels unnecessary, and it fights to stay in charge. For me, this showed up as sudden overthinking. I'd start questioning things that were already working. I'd replay conversations that felt fine. I'd imagine problems that didn't exist yet. Old habits, trying to reassert themselves.
The tricky part?
This doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like wisdom. But wisdom feels grounded. This felt restless. That's how I learned the difference. Ego tries to tighten. Alignment loosens. Every time I listened to that voice, my body tensed, my chest closed. The calm disappeared. That was the signal. Your brain doesn't need ego control once a new identity is stabilizing. But ego isn't aware of that. It only knows how to keep you safe the old way. So it creates scenarios, doubts, just in case thinking. Most people mistake this for intuition and act on it. And when they do, things wobble. That's why so many people say, everything was going great, and then it fell apart. But what if it didn't fall apart? What if it was being tested? Because right after this phase, there's often a moment where things seem to pause again, or even regress slightly. And that's where the final lesson shows up. This is the moment that almost convinced me I'd imagined the whole thing. Right after the calm, right after the small signs, things wobbled. Not dramatically, just enough to make me question myself. A plan stalled. Someone went quiet. An old problem reappeared for a second. And my first instinct was, here we go. I knew it. But something felt different this time. The wobble didn't pull me emotionally like it used to. There was no spiral, no panic, just awareness. And that's when I realized what this phase really is. Your brain doesn't lock in a new identity without testing it. not to punish you, to confirm it's real. Think about learning balance. You don't stand perfectly still at first. You sway, you correct, you wobble until stability becomes automatic. That's what's happening here. The old pattern makes one last appearance, not because it's returning, but because your brain is checking, do we still react this way? And if you don't, the pattern loses its grip. I remember responding calmly to something that would have wrecked me before. Later, it hit me. That moment mattered more than any visualization I'd ever done. Because my brain saw proof, not imagined proof, lived proof. That's why this wobble is so important. If you overreact here, you reinforce the old identity. If you stay neutral, the new one locks in. Most people don't know this, so they panic at the wobble and undo everything. But if you're aware, if you let the wobble pass without story, something incredible happens next. Your brain stops checking, and when it stops checking, reality starts moving fast. This moment is quiet enough that most people miss it. There's no announcement, no internal fireworks, no voice saying, okay, this is real now.
It just settles.
For me, it showed up as a decision I didn't consciously make. I stopped checking. Not checking results, not checking signs, not checking myself. I wasn't trying to be detached, I just didn't feel the pull anymore. And that's when I realized my brain had committed. Once your mind accepts a new identity as normal, it stops scanning for threats, it stops comparing, it stops rehearsing worst-case scenarios. The background noise disappears. That's the commitment moment. And here's the wild part. From the outside, nothing has changed yet. But internally, everything has. I remember thinking, if this never happens, I'd still be okay. That thought wasn't giving up. It was freedom.
And freedom is the final requirement.
Your brain can't lock in a new reality if it senses desperation. Desperation signals lack. Lack keeps the old identity alive. But when you're okay either way, the brain lets go of control. That's when alignment becomes effortless. And once that happens, time does something strange again. But this time in the opposite direction. Things start moving faster than expected. Opportunities overlap. Conversations line up. Decisions get easier. And if you're not prepared for that speed, it can feel overwhelming. So before we get there, you need to understand why things accelerate after commitment, and why this acceleration is another place people accidentally slow themselves down. This part caught me off guard. After all that waiting, all that quiet, things started moving fast, not rushed, not chaotic.
Just efficient.
Emails got answered quickly, decisions landed without debate. People showed up already halfway aligned, and instead of excitement, I felt something else. Nervous, because speed exposes what's unresolved. When things move slowly, you can overthink, you can hesitate, you can stall. When things move fast, there's no time to hide. I remember being offered an opportunity I'd wanted for years. Old me would have panicked, analyzed, second-guessed. This time, I said yes before my mind could catch up. And afterward, my brain tried to create fear retroactively. What if you can't handle this? What if this is too much? What if you mess it up? That's not intuition. That's the last echo of the old identity trying to slow things down. Speed feels unsafe when you're used to preparation through worry. But momentum doesn't mean pressure. It means alignment. Your brain isn't scrambling anymore. It's responding. And here's the key difference. Forced speed feels draining. Aligned speed feels clean. No push, no pull, just motion. But if you're not aware of this phase, you might mistake that nervous energy for a warning and hit the brakes. That's why some people say, things were happening too fast, so I stepped back. They didn't step back from danger. They stepped back from unfamiliar ease. Because the next thing your brain has to learn is how to receive without bracing. And that's harder than it sounds. This was humbling to admit. I thought I was blocked when I didn't receive. I didn't realize I was blocked when I finally did. The first time something landed easily, no struggle, no proving, no chasing, I felt exposed. Like I hadn't earned it the old way. My body tightened. My mind searched for strings attached. Receiving without effort can feel unsafe if you're used to surviving through effort. Because effort gave you identity.
Effort gave you worth.
Effort gave you a reason for the outcome. So when something arrives without that familiar cost, the brain looks for danger. I caught myself minimizing good news, downplaying wins, saying things like, "Let's see how long this lasts." That wasn't humility. That was protection. Your brain is asking, if I accept this fully, who am I now? And that question brings up a reflex most people don't notice. They push it away, subtly. They delay. They deflect. They stay half open. Not because they don't want it, but because receiving changes the rules. When you receive, you can't complain the same way. You can't identify as the struggler anymore. You can't bond over lack. That's a bigger shift than people realize. I had to learn to let good things sit without commentary. No analysis, no emotional buffer. Just let them be real. That's a muscle. And right after you start building it, another reflex shows up. One that sounds like humility, but quietly keeps you small. This reflex is sneaky. It sounds wise.
It sounds humble.
It sounds mature. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm just being realistic. Let's not celebrate too early. I used to say those things all the time. I thought I was being grounded. What I was really doing was keeping one foot in the old identity, just in case. Because if you fully accept that something is working, you can't pretend you didn't want it that badly. And that makes you visible. Your brain learned a long time ago that visibility can be risky. Expectations, attention, judgment, loss. So right when things start going well, it tries to lower the volume. Don't get too excited. Don't stand out. Don't relax yet. I noticed this when good things would happen, and my first instinct was to neutralize them emotionally. I'd move on fast, change the subject, shrug it off, and every time I did, the momentum softened. Not because the universe was punishing me, but because I wasn't fully inhabiting the new reality. Receiving isn't just about letting things come to you, it's about letting them stay. That means letting your nervous system learn a new normal. When you stop downplaying what's working, your brain updates its safety map. It realizes, oh, this level is okay now. That's when stability replaces fluctuation. But before that settles, there's another layer people rarely talk about. The quiet grief that shows up when the old version of you is officially gone. This part surprised me. And I thought becoming someone new would feel like relief, and it does. But there's also this unexpected ache. Not sadness exactly, more like nostalgia for a version of yourself you can't return to. I remember catching myself missing the old tension, the late nights overthinking, the constant striving. It sounds strange, but those patterns had been companions for a long time. They gave my days structure, they gave me stories, they gave me a reason to feel important. When they faded, there was space. And space can feel lonely at first. That's the grief. Not because the old life was better,
But because it was known.
Your brain has to mourn familiar suffering before it fully accepts unfamiliar ease. Most people don't realize this, so they misinterpret the feeling. They think, maybe I was happier before, or something's missing. What's missing is the identity that used to fill every quiet moment. I let myself feel that grief instead of fixing it. No drama, no story, just acknowledgement. And once I did, something softened.
I stopped trying to resurrect the old self for comfort. I let it be a chapter instead of a crutch.
That's when the new identity finally felt real. Not exciting, not fragile, just mine. But there's one last habit the brain tries before it fully lets go. It shows up when everything is finally stable, and it's easy to miss. This habit is so normal that most people don't even realize they're doing it.
It's the habit of checking yourself.
Checking how you feel, checking if you're regressing, checking if this version of you is holding.
I didn't notice it until it stopped.
There was a day where I realized I hadn't asked myself, am I okay? Am I aligned? Am I doing this right? And that's when I knew something had locked in. When an identity is fragile, you monitor it. When it's stable, you live from it. Old me was always scanning, emotions, thoughts, signs, reactions. Constant self-awareness that felt responsible but was actually exhausting. New me didn't need supervision. Not because I was perfect, but because I trusted myself. That's the final habit your brain releases, self-surveillance. Once your mind believes the new baseline is safe, it stops checking for collapse. It stops rehearsing what could go wrong. Life becomes less about managing yourself and more about responding naturally.
That's when you stop feeling like you're manifesting something.
You're just participating.
But there's a strange side effect here.
When things finally feel normal, people sometimes worry that they've lost the magic, the excitement, the spiritual spark. That worry can pull you backward if you don't understand it.
So before we finish this journey, there's one more illusion to clear up.
The idea that change should feel dramatic forever. This took me a long time to understand.
I thought transformation would feel magical forever,
Like I'd wake up every day amazed at my life.
but that's not how real change works.
Real change feels normal. And at first, that can feel disappointing. I remember thinking,
Is this it?
why doesn't this feel bigger? But that question came from an old belief, that struggle equals meaning. When you've spent years chasing, visualizing, hoping, and trying to change, the absence of tension can feel anticlimactic. But normal is the sign it worked. Your brain isn't meant to live in constant awe. It's meant to adapt. And once it adapts, the miracle becomes your baseline. That's not a loss of magic. That's integration. I stopped telling the story of how hard things used to be, not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't relevant anymore.
And when I stopped repeating the old story, I stopped reinforcing the old identity.
That's the quiet power of this phase.
You don't need to announce the change. You don't need to prove it.
You don't need to relive how far you've come. You just live.
And living without narration is freedom.
But right before we close this out, there's one final thing I want you to notice. Something that might already be happening in your life right now. Because if it is, you're closer than you think. If you're wondering whether this phase applies to you, here are the signs I wish I'd recognized sooner.
You're less reactive than you used to be.
Things still happen, but they don't hook into you the same way. You don't feel the need to explain yourself as much. You let moments pass without narrating them. You feel strangely okay without answers. Questions don't create urgency anymore.
You're not chasing clarity.
You're living without it. And maybe the biggest one, you don't feel like proving anything.
Not to people,
Not to yourself,
not even to life.
When I was in this phase, I thought I was falling off spiritually. I wasn't journaling as much. I wasn't visualizing. I wasn't consuming content nonstop. But what I was doing was trusting myself. That's a huge shift.
Your brain stops outsourcing certainty.
It stops looking outside for permission. If you've noticed you don't resonate with content you used to love, if old fears feel distant, almost outdated, if you're more present but less performative, that's not loss of alignment. That's graduation. And here's the most important thing. This phase doesn't ask you to do anything. It asks you not to interfere.
No forcing,
No fixing.
no going back to basics.
Just presence. Because when your brain releases the old identity fully, it doesn't need guidance anymore. It needs space. And if you can give yourself that space, even for a little while, the last piece falls into place on its own. Which brings us to the final truth I want to leave you with. The truth is,
Change doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't prove itself.
it doesn't rush in to convince you. It settles.
And once it settles, it stops feeling like change at all.
Looking back, the biggest shifts in my life didn't feel powerful in the moment. They felt ordinary. The power only became obvious in hindsight. That's why people miss it. They're waiting for a feeling, a sign, a moment where everything clicks. But real transformation doesn't click.
It stabilizes.
Your brain doesn't need drama to change. It needs safety. And the quiet phase you might be in right now, the calm, the detachment, the lack of urgency, isn't emptiness. It's integration.
You're not losing motivation.
You're losing resistance.
You're not confused.
You're between identities. You're not behind. You're early. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's this. Don't interrupt the quiet. Don't rush to feel something. Don't go searching for proof. Don't recreate the old tension just to feel familiar. Because your brain does this right before change. It lets go. And once it does, life doesn't need to push anymore. It responds. If this resonated with you, sit with it. Let it land. You don't need to do anything else right now. Sometimes the most powerful move is letting the update finish.